I just realized since my light is now up there instead of being on level with me, I can actually wear my glasses while filming. This is the best thing ever. What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Today, we are going to jump right into our story about Paul Fugate, the park ranger that vanished and was never found. Before I had to change my career path due to health issues, I actually considered becoming a park ranger or something like that, just because they do a lot of really important work when it comes to conservation efforts and wildlife management and educating the public. And the jobs of the remaining few are probably 10 times harder than they were before all of the personnel and funding cuts earlier this year. So I just wanted to put that out there that if you visit a national or a state park, if you see a ranger, thank them for what they do. Paul Fugate was hired to the National Park Service in 1965 after having a really hard time holding down a stable job due to his rebellious nature. In my reading, what a lot of his rebellious nature was chalked up to was personally presenting himself in a way that was different and not as accepted back then. He had a beard, long hair, he was in an open marriage with his wife Dodie, and he smoked marijuana. Though I did also read that he did have kind of an issue with authority, so that was probably part of the issue. But I just wanted to note that it seemed like the issues he encountered with the Park Service and other careers he had was more a product of the times rather than him personally, at least in a lot of instances. His first posting was in the Carlsbad Caverns of New Mexico, where, like I said, he encountered some issues due to his presentation, though this got worse when he was moved to a second posting, the Navajo National Monument, located in northeast Arizona. He butted heads very often with the superintendent there that really wanted to fire him. In 1970, he was moved to his third posting in the Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona. And a year later, he was fired, probably to the delight of the previous superintendent. It was said that he was fired due to his poor attitude and also abuse of government equipment because somebody accused him of stealing hay to feed his wife's horse, which he denied. He sued, and in 1976, got his job back to apparently no one's delight, including Paul's. Paul lived in a cabin on the monument while his wife Dodie lived in Tucson, about 2 hours away. And from everything that I read about him, he seemed frustrated, maybe restless would be a better word, or at least pretty unhappy with his life. One of his coworkers, Bill Murray, said that he believed that Paul was personally wasted at Chiricahua, and because of his issues with the higher ups, that he was never going to get a good posting at a larger national park. On Sunday, January 13th of 1980, around 2:30 p.m., Paul, who was 41 at this point, told an aide at the visitor center that he was going to go do a trail, though he didn't mention which one he was going to hike, and that if he wasn't back by about 4:30 to just close up shop without him. All trails in Chiricahua could be completed in a single day, so most of them weren't very long, so this didn't seem abnormal. When he left, he was wearing the standard Park Service uniform, Red Wing boots, and he was carrying a green parka. He left behind his money, his ID, his pocket magnifying glass, and a set of keys, though it is said that he usually carried 2 sets. So it was assumed, I guess, that he would come back for them later. But by 8:30 p.m., he had still not returned to his cabin. Paul's 21-year-old girlfriend and seasonal park employee Bonnie, I don't know if that's her actual name or just a name that was given for her to protect her identity, called up the monument superintendent, Ted Scott, and told him what was happening. So Ted went out with 2 other employees and began to search through the park in the different trails and canyons, calling out his name, but they didn't find anything. The following day, 22 searchers and a dog searched the park, but again, they didn't find anything of note. I'm not sure if Dodie was notified the night before or on this day. However, she stayed in Tucson. She claims that she visited a friend who was also a therapist of hers, and she also stayed in order to stay near the phone in case there was any updates with the case, or in case somebody called like with a ransom demand. On Tuesday the 16th, 16 more searchers joined the effort, and also the Arizona National Guard was flying overhead with a helicopter, but they still did not find Paul. Dodie arrived with her friend on Thursday the 17th with a pair of horses to help in the search. However, at this point, the search had slowed down a little bit due to snowfall. People that saw Dodie arrive noted that she seemed very calm the entire time that she was there. The only time that she seemed upset was when she went to Paul's cabin and had a discussion with Bonnie. So for a little background on the relationship between, I guess, the three of them, Paul and Dodie had an open relationship because of health problems that Dodie was experiencing. And because of that, the one stipulation was that all relationships that Paul had were purely physical. And the last time Dodie had come to visit, she and Paul had picked up Bonnie from the airport to bring her back to the cabin. They had a discussion how Bonnie did not want them seeing each other anymore because it seemed to be getting too emotional. So she was unhappy to see Bonnie still there. And then it came out that Bonnie was pregnant. And this is where people say they did see Dodie pretty upset. Bonnie said that Paul had told her that he had a vasectomy, and Dodie said that she had never heard of this before, so they were both confused. Dodie says that she had no ill will towards Bonnie or anything like that, but she did encourage her to go into town, get an actual test to confirm that she was pregnant, which she was, and then decided to terminate the pregnancy. The search for Paul went on for about 2 weeks, and while he wasn't found, that doesn't mean no evidence was found. 5 days after Paul went missing, another park worker named Dick Horton said that he believed he saw Paul the day that he went missing. He said that Paul was in a pickup truck, slumped between two men as they were speeding away from the park property. He didn't say this like he wasn't sure if it was Paul, like it was someone that resembled Paul, because he apparently turned to his wife at the time and said, "There goes Paul Fugit." One of the investigators on the case decided to put Dick under hypnosis to see if they could glean any more details from this encounter. And after being hypnotized, Dick said he remembered that the truck was green and had a camping shell on it, that the man who was driving looked to be in his 30s and was wearing a plaid shirt that was red, black, and white, and he had a beard, specifically a Kenny Loggins beard, while the other wore a jacket that resembled a Park Service uniform. At the Faraway Ranch, a piece of property that was donated to the monument 3 years prior, there was also tire tracks and signs in the dirt of some sort of struggle. Dodie, believing that this may have been the last place that her husband was, decided to bring in a psychic named Sandy Brooke. Now, I'm not sure how much that this psychic was told before being brought onto the scene, but she claimed to see something essentially through Paul's eyes through a time portal on the property. She said that she saw two men crouched over the body of an unconscious woman, and when they noticed Paul, they apprehended him, forced some sort of drug down his throat, and he went unconscious, and then they dumped his body somewhere in Mexico. The monument is only 40 miles from the Mexican border, and at the time, there was a lot of drug running and human trafficking, but there weren't any reports of suspicious activity or anything like that around the monument or around Faraway Ranch, except by Dodie. She and Paul were apparently planning to move into a bunkhouse on the Faraway Ranch in order to keep an eye on suspicious and possibly illegal activity happening there. Also, this fell outside of the responsibilities of a park ranger, and Paul had told nobody about this. In Paul's cabin, investigators found an uncashed check sent by Dodie, which she said was for him to open up a new bank account for when she moved out there so they could live on the Faraway Ranch together. He was supposed to go into Wilcox, a nearby town, and open a new account because they didn't have a local branch for the bank that she used in Tucson. However, investigators said that doesn't make any sense because there was for their bank, meaning that they didn't have to transfer their money. They also found an incomplete life insurance application. So after the official search ended, Dodie organized unofficial searches of volunteers just to check down trails and other places, just to keep a lookout for Paul. It was also at this 2-week mark that Doty asked the park superintendent, Ted Scott, when she'd start receiving Paul's retirement benefits, which she was entitled to if he had died on the job. Now, while foul play was very highly suspected, there was no evidence that he was dead. So, especially for her to be asking so soon, I know as time goes on, it's less likely for a missing person to come home, but I don't know, her asking so soon, it rubbed some people the wrong way. She said she asked just so she could prepare herself in case the worst news did come, so she could get ready for it. Do with that information what you will. Doty was also brought in for a polygraph test where she was asked if she had seen or talked to Paul since he disappeared. She agreed to do it, but she brought a tape recorder, a friend with her, as well as her lawyer. She passed the test, but from what I understand, the results creeped a little towards inconclusive. She did pass it, and the polygrapher said that he believed her, but she was very, very calm during the session, which is essentially how you pass a polygraph test, and therefore they can be faked. A few weeks after Paul had disappeared, the Park Service formally fired him, essentially saying that he walked off the job. This meant that Doty would not be entitled to any of his retirement benefits, and they also demanded that she pay back the wages that they paid to her while he was missing, which amounted to about $7,000. This garnered a lot of bad PR for the Park Service because they were denying the owed benefits to likely a widow after her husband literally vanished, and this legal battle was drawn out for 9 whole years. Craig Emanuel, an investigator on the case, received a letter from Bloomington, Illinois in October of the same year. This was a typed letter urging him to look into a man named Ernest Goff, who is incarcerated in Arizona on multiple charges, though he denied any involvement with the case. In 1984, another letter typed in the same format was sent to the Department of the Interior, giving another name that they should look into, pointing in the direction of another incarcerated man named Tex Carpenter. The letter read, quote, "Gentlemen, are you still seeking the whereabouts of a national park ranger who disappeared from the Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona in January of 1980? If so, Tex Carpenter, an inmate in the Arizona State Prisons, is who you should talk to, as he told me nearly a year ago that he helped knock off and get rid of a park ranger who got in his partner's way when they were doing something illegal with narcotics in the above-mentioned park." The real name of Tex was James Carpenter, and he had been arrested with Ernest Goff. While being questioned about this, he did ramble and apparently tell a lot of different stories that went nowhere, but he did say that he was present when Ernest Goff and another unnamed man shot and killed Paul, then drove his body to Santa Cruz, where they dumped him in a riverbed. He was asked to take a polygraph. He refused until weeks later, but then he recanted his entire story. Years later, he claimed that he actually did have some information on the case, but he would only share it with investigators if some sort of deal was made. So the FBI, already probably thinking he was an unreliable person to talk to, said no thank you. Going back to the letter that directed the Department of the Interior to question Tex, the word gentleman at the very beginning was followed by a semicolon. Generally, after addressing somebody in a letter like that, it's followed by a comma, or it's also correct to use a colon, but not really a semicolon. That was a very noticeable thing there. A journalist named Brendan Burnell was looking into the case, and he got to interview Doty and got to look through some of her documents and files in her home, and he found a letter to the Department of the Interior. Mind you, at the same time this letter was sent, she was also in her legal battle. Her and her lawyers were going back, trying to convince the Department of the Interior to look over the evidence of the case again so she could get her benefits. He found a letter that she had written with the same choice of punctuation. Now, this isn't concrete in any way. I'm sure there's a lot of people that do it, even if it's not technically correct, but it is notable, and I did want to add that in. Police in Racine, Wisconsin reached out to Emanuel about a man named David. That is not his real name. That's a name that was given to him, that was overheard at a party bragging about how he killed a Border Patrol agent in Arizona in 1980. Now, Paul was not a Border Patrol agent. However, This man could have misremembered or did not read his badge or anything. Who knows? This man did live in Tucson in 1980. Now, one question, David claimed that he was just trying to sound cool, like a badass to his friends. Kind of a weird thing to lie about, but who knows? He did take a polygraph test that he did fail, but he claimed it was just his nerves, and the night before he had taken a lot of sleeping pills, so they threw it out. Emmanuel decided to look more into him and into his former employer named Frank Youngkist, who owned an auto shop. When Emmanuel went to question him, Frank Youngkist greeted him by asking how Dodie was, even though Emmanuel said he had no indication that he even knew who Dodie was, and then made a comment about how hard missing persons cases are. He said this was kind of a confrontational statement, and the questioning just kind of became very heated until Emmanuel was kicked out of the shop. When he tried to look into any criminal records of Frank Youngkist, apparently Frank knew the DA, and the DA denied him access to these records. He was able to uncover that Frank Youngkist had a plane that he regularly flew down to Mexico, and it was theorized that it was probably due to some drug-related activity. Emmanuel, during his investigation, looked into over 400 different leads, but nothing really panned out. But he always believed that David and Frank were probably at least involved, if not guilty. A Park Service investigator named Clay Anderson was placed on the case in 2017 to look into a new lead that they had. And when talking to the journalist Brendan Burnell, he talked about a potential sighting that a colleague of Paul's had. I'm not sure what year this happened. I couldn't identify it. However, this apparently took place in a bar in Sierra Vista, 35 miles from the Mexican border. The colleague was sitting there when he saw a man walk in who looked just like Paul. The man walked in, sat down, ordered a drink. And as he was sipping his drink, he was looking around until he met eyes with this colleague. There was a second of recognition, and then the man got up, grabbed his stuff, and took off, leaving his drink behind. So his colleague, thinking very quickly, placed the cup that the man was holding into a plastic bag and tested it for fingerprints. Fingerprints were able to be taken from the cup, and when they were ran against a database, Paul's fingerprints were not in the database, despite being a park ranger for over a decade, and park rangers are law enforcement, so he had to have his fingerprints in the database, but nothing was there, so they could not confirm if this was Paul or not. Now, there is so much to the story. I'm sure there's parts that I missed. I would definitely recommend looking at the article by Brendan Burnell. He goes so in depth. I also recommend looking into the video by the Lore Lodge and just get sources from elsewhere because, again, I probably missed some stuff. So while reading and researching, it seems like there are 5 theories as to what people think became of Paul Fugit. The first is what Emmanuel originally thought, that David and Frank Youngkist are somehow involved, potentially in a drug deal gone wrong or something. Remember, Paul did partake in marijuana, or he could have just stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. David did have a friend whose father owned a property that was sold only 2 years after buying it, and this father of the friend was an associate of Frank Youngkist. There was also the initial hostility from Frank. There is his regular plane trips down to Mexico and back. Though I will say when cadaver dogs were put on this property, nothing was found, but that doesn't mean that maybe they moved it or it was meant to be a red herring. So wherever they really put Paul, allegedly, there's no trace. There's also Goff and Carpenter, who could have theoretically been involved, though there's no way to verify now that they are passed. So any information they may have had is kind of gone now, unless somebody else they knew steps forward. Now, a theory that a lot of people seem to have is the Park Service, or at least people working for the Park Service, were involved. In December of 1978, Paul apparently wrote out a letter as well as a will for Dodie, telling her what to do in case he died because he wasn't sure he would be alive for much longer. There was also the lack of interest by people in the Park Service to find Paul. They said he probably just walked off and was living his life somewhere with a new girlfriend. He also had beef with his superiors. It was well known among his colleagues. And again, why wouldn't they have his fingerprints saved in the database, considering he'd been a park ranger for so long? Were they deleted, if that's even possible, or was somebody just negligent? I understand why this theory is here, considering he did have beef with them, though I'm not fully convinced, though I do believe that once he was gone, they were just like, finally. Theory 4 and Theory 5 are kind of linked. One is that Paul just decided to up and leave one day. He was unhappy with his life and he just wanted a fresh start somewhere. He had told Bonnie that he had had a vasectomy, which means he was kind of trying to deny her pregnancy if she took it to him. So it didn't sound like he was very happy about that. He obviously wasn't happy with his job. Murray said at the time of the investigation, he kind of fluffed up how he thought Paul and Dodi's relationship was because he thought she was being fucked over by the Park Service and he didn't want Paul to look bad. But he said later on that he doesn't think Dodi and their relationship was an anchor to keep him anywhere. And that leads into the connected theory that Dodi maybe even helped him leave, whether it be to make him happy or that he at least said, hey, if I'm gone, if they think I'm dead, you at least get paid out for my death. You will get my retirement, you will get like my benefits and stuff, so you'll benefit from it as well. This one is probably the one I'm leaning most towards because of the coincidence with the letter, like not just with the semicolon, but the Department of the Interior receives a letter at the same time that Dodi is trying to convince them to look into the evidence more so she can get her benefits. There's also the span of 4 days that she was still in Tucson, that she didn't come to look for her husband. The first day, I guess I kind of understand staying near the phone in case it's a false alarm or something, but even so, it's only a 2-hour drive if you think your spouse might be in danger or something, as well as a couple other weird things. During her interview with Brendan Burnell, she had an outfit laid out, like laid over a chair, and Brendan asked what it was. She said these were the civilian clothes that Paul was going to change into when he got home that night, but obviously he never came home. She was in Tucson that night, so maybe Paul had them laid out, but they also weren't civilian clothes. One of them was a uniform shirt, and on top of that, the brand that the shirt was did not come out until 7 years after his disappearance. So when this was pointed out to her, she said, oh, well, maybe it's one of my shirts. I don't know, my bad. So just weird little things like that. Like, I understand being very sentimental, but how are you going to mistake one of your own shirts that looks like a uniform shirt for the shirt that your husband, who's been missing for so long, was going to wear decades ago when you weren't even there? I don't know. All of it's very strange in my opinion. However, this video is not me making any allegations towards Dodi or anybody else that may still be alive or has passed on, because I don't know. But if I had to put my money on something, again, I don't know, this is just my opinion, my money would be maybe Dodi helped him get away. But what do you guys think? I would love to hear your theories or questions in the comments below. Maybe I'll look into him a little bit more, but I'd love to have a discussion because there's so many moving parts, so many suspects and weird details and stuff that really it could go in any direction, and it's still being investigated to this day. So I wonder if they're still looking into stuff. There is stuff that Burnell did not include in his writing because the case is ongoing. So maybe we'll eventually find out what happened to Paul, or at least have a better idea of what could have happened to him. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps get my video out to other like-minded spooky individuals who might like this series that we're doing on the missing 411 cases. Like I said, comment what you think happened to Paul Fugate down below, or give me another case suggestion or any other suggestions for videos that you guys would like to see. I am always open to it, and even if I don't get to them in a timely manner, I promise I eventually will. If you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so you'll be notified anytime I upload. I am getting to the final stages of prepping for the cryptid drinking game. I have the poster board right there. I have all my cards in the other room that my boyfriend's going to write trivia and stuff on. It's going to be lots of fun, and if I'm able to, I may even stream it. That's a big maybe, because I just found out that this camera that I have had for like 2 years, I can actually use as a webcam. So that might also be a thing. So if that is, I will set a date, I will promote it so you guys know ahead of time, and we will have a fun time together. If not, it'll still be a funny video for you guys anyways. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.